Well, hi again, Roy.
Hey Warren, how are you today?
Well, good, and thanks for joining us, everybody out there in the stratosphere.
Yeah,
Um, Episode 2, hard to believe. We had a very successful first run there last week, and boy, what a fascinating time with David Hirsch and Ben Page, of course. Um, Today, Roy, as you probably saw, what episode are we discussing?
well, we're going to be discussing It's a Matter of Life and Death.
Wow, episode 2. Yeah, one of my favorites. And we're gonna bring on a very special guest here in just a moment. We're waiting for Dave Thomas to show up in the background, but Robert Wood's already here, as you can see on the ticker on the bottom, to chat with us for the next hour or so on a matter of life and death. In the meantime, though, Roy, what will we run?
I think we should be running our opening credits.
That's right. That's right.
Such a cool opening. Barry Gray just knocks it out of the park every time.
Yeah, no, for sure. I really love it. Again, I touched on it last week. And Catherine's brilliant editing of
Oh,
all 24 episodes in that sequence is just
amazing.
remarkable.
Amazing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Hi, Bob.
Hey, it's hard to follow up that opening.
I know. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, thanks for joining in today. A matter of life and death. I think we're going to be able to touch on a few really interesting things in regards to episode 2, and of course, for anybody that isn't aware, it was actually the very first episode that was sort of in the can, as it were,
Mhm.
in production and completed even before Breakaway. And because of that, there were some early changes that took place between that version and the version that we saw initially, or originally, I should say. And I was just noticing that Dave Thomas is joining us, so we will bring Dave on and say hello to Dave as well. Your timing is excellent, kind sir.
Hey, Dave.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Sorry, I don't think I'm late. The clocks went back last night in the UK, so it's still so maybe that's the confusion. So
That's
yeah,
okay.
so it's 10 past 9 here.
No problem, no problem. And yeah, somebody reminded me that yesterday, so I was trying to get the word out there to anybody in the UK. So no problem, nobody's fault. But glad you could make it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's good to see Bob as well. And yeah,
Well,
we're really looking forward to this discussion. It's hard to believe that we are up to episode 2, Matter of Life and Death, and it's going to be interesting to talk about the origins of this story.
Sorry, there is a bit of audio feedback coming back from somebody's computer. It might be Dave's.
let me see if I can turn myself down a little.
Warren, you were talking about how it was the first episode completed.
Yes.
And one great little piece of evidence of that is that some of the prints that we can still see occasionally floating around have got the different credit font for Rudy Gernreich,
Yes.
which is a cool kind of little connection there.
It is, and in fact, it was interesting in the Landau tapes. That was one of the episodes I focused on as far as transferring sooner than a lot of the others. And it actually, for everybody in North America, we saw that Gernrek credit in the alternate font. I think in the UK not so much. And Dave, how's your audio doing there? You want to just run a test quick?
Okay, how's that?
Yeah,
Can you
that's
hear
great.
me?
Sounds okay, I think.
Is that feeding back, Bob, or is that okay?
No, it sounds much better now. I'm not hearing anything coming back.
Yep.
Great, cool.
Perfect. Yeah, so that Landau tape actually had the proper Futura font in it for Gernrek's credit. And of course, that's just one of the changes we were talking about. And this is where Dave and myself sort of got involved over the last year with recreating or reconstructing that original version, that original concept for the episode. It was a lot of fun to go back and even not only the opening credits, but the end credits in particular, with all those really, really nice Keith Wilson paintings that were used. And Dave just did a remarkable job with all of that.
Yeah, it really stood out nicely. And I remember actually the first time I saw those, and this is going back for me, probably it was around 1987, 1988. And a mutual friend of ours, Lou Place, had actually had a copy of those, and he had sent that off to me. And I was like, wow, this is just like so unique. I had never, seen it up until that point. So it was kind of really cool to experience that. And then, of course, now, here we are almost like 50 years later with all of this. It's pretty amazing. So it's nice to see some of the styles that were considered, and also how things have developed with the series. And Bob is going to really give us some behind the scenes in regards to how this story evolved, right, Bob, in regards to the original story?
I will, but you mentioned Keith Wilson. And so I'm going to mention that behind me on the wall here, I have Keith Wilson's original pre-production painting, his design for Terra Nova. And if I move that way, you can see the whole thing.
It's beautiful.
So it's a gorgeous painting from Keith Wilson.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very grateful to have hanging in my office here.
Very nice.
But yeah, so Matter of Life and Death, of course, I think everybody knows that it started off as Siren Planet, which was a script written by Art Wallace. Art Wallace, familiar to Star Trek fans maybe, because he wrote 2 episodes of the original Star Trek series, Obsession and Assignment Earth. And he also did an episode of The Invaders. So he, and I think a couple of other things as well. And then he went on to do more sci-fi after Space. But he had some science fiction screenwriting credentials, so he was a good choice to bring on board. And the Star Trek connection, I'm sure, was helpful as well. But Siren Planet was written based on the original guidelines for the show, which were very, very early. And by the time they actually got to production, although they'd been through a couple of different drafts of Art Wallace's script, it wasn't suitable for what the production had actually become. A lot of the characters were different. Professor Bergman was called Professor Penmarek. Sandra Sabatini was still there instead of Sandra Benesch. Alan Carter was Jim Grayson. There's a whole bunch of different character names like that were different. Bob Mathias was Dr. Fujita. So there were all those changes. And then one big one was that instead of having a fleet of Eagles, they had 2 ships, and they were called Prober 1 and Prober 2. And I mean, you can't imagine it. Knowing Space 929 how we do now, you can't imagine them having only 2 ships. I mean, there were, how would you ever do Operation Exodus? You could never have a fleet leaving the base. You could never have a fleet going up to defend the base against, alien attack or anything if you only have 2 ships. And you also couldn't be blowing them up regularly, which, I think everybody would miss. So, that was something. Then also, some of the set names were different. Main Mission was called Central Control, and Medical Center was referred to alternately in Siren Planet as either sick bay or the hospital. Of course, hospital is too, commonplace. And sick bay echoes Star Trek. So they had to change that. So there were a lot of elements. Even the relationship relationships between the characters were different than what they eventually became. So Johnny Byrne ended up rewriting it, and it became Matter of Life and Death. Interestingly, Siren Planet had a lot of similarities to Solaris in particular. Paradise Lost is another one, actually. Paradise Lost, Milton's ancient, I don't know about ancient, but old epic of, finding this paradise and losing it, and there were all the kind of sort of Judeo-Christian elements to that. And I mean, thinking of that, I mean, in Matter of Life and Death, John and Helena even eat the fruit. So that's still there. But basically it was Solaris. There's this planet which has the ability to conjure images or people from loved ones from the main character's past. And in Solaris, it was the lead character's wife. Here we have Helena Russell's husband who comes back. And also later in the Siren Planet script, Koenig's father comes back as well. And so, which is interesting because he gave a lot of background to Koenig, where he came from, that kind of thing, the dynamic with him and his father. That also happened in Solaris. So there were too many similarities, really. Even the title, Siren Planet, kind of echoes the fact that in Solaris, the planet was literally kind of calling out to the astronauts like a siren would, calling the seafarers to shore, basically. So there were too many connections that they had to get rid of, and Johnny Byrne did a lot of that. Although some of those things still stay, the lead character's husband is still there. The planet does conjure up his image, and so that's all there. But the themes, the themes that ended up coming through are of the limits of human comprehension, how we manifest our own fears and destinies. But I think ultimately the biggest theme that comes through in Matter of Life and Death is bereavement. And it's very much Helena Russell's episode. Breakaway was very much Koenig's episode. This one's very much Helena's episode. And then Black Sun, you can say, is very largely Professor Bergman's episode. So it's interesting how the first three episodes kind of belong to the three key characters. But in this one, to do with bereavement, Helena loses her husband again. She loses the planet, which they were hoping was going to be their new home, the kind of Paradise Lost again. She literally loses Moonbase Alpha itself, the moon, and everybody on it because they blow it up, which is kind of, breaking it out of orbit in the first episode. Second episode, they blow the whole thing up, kill everybody. And then at the end, she's lost everything. She's left alone. She's surrounded by destruction and death, and she's just there crying. So it's, that theme of bereavement focused around Helena's experience is really key to the whole episode.
Yeah, to interject one thing too, Bob, and it really was. It was loss followed by loss followed by loss, and then the final thing, the final blow, so to speak, was then she lost John Koenig because there was the potential relationship starting. I mean, there were warm moments, even when Koenig is visiting her in her quarters just to make sure that she's all right. So it's that warm connection that you can see forming as things are developing since Breakaway, and it's in a different limelight. However, when this all happens, she's lost, as you were saying, all the loss that took place, and then finally to lose Koenig and be alone, and then essentially that's when Lee Russell appears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm actually picking up on some feedback as well too.
Well, now we got some puppy feedback.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He's starting to act up. That's my dog Lupo in the background, and
Yeah, I think it is on Dave's side, unfortunately.
can't control him.
I'm not sure. Dave, is there a way maybe you could grab a headset and plug it in quick?
He's on mute.
Yeah, I put myself on mute because I thought that was the feedback problem.
I think it is,
okay.
but
I haven't got any headphones with me. So like coming straight from
okay.
Through the door. I'd have to find some headphones. I don't usually use headphones. If I
It's
turn
okay.
myself down a bit now, does that help?
Yeah, it seems to be it sort of acts up when we're speaking. So just give that a second. Does that sound okay, guys?
Sounding good at the moment, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll put myself on mute when you guys are talking. I'll try and mute myself then, and hopefully that will help. And
No problem.
All right. So then I'll carry on. Matter of Life and Death, second episode in production order, since we're doing this podcast in production order. But of course, they wrote it to be able to be screened in any order, since that was how the series was going to be broadcast in syndication. Even if it was going to have a network sale, I mean, they still could have broadcasted in any order. So there were lines in the episode. I think we made it this time, and many things have happened since we left our solar system, broke away from our solar system. So lines like that were put in so that you could screen it in a different order than the production order.
That's very interesting, because I was just going to ask you, in those early drafts, was there any more DNA that sort of tied it to the lost scenes
No.
that we're talking about in Breakaway, where they set up the fact that Helena had lost a husband in 5 years, things like that? Nothing.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's there. I mean, the element that Helena's husband had been lost on the Astro 7 mission. That's, of course, in Siren Planet. Sometimes it's referred to as the Argo 7 mission, which I think was maybe what Wallace called it at the beginning, and then it got changed to Astro 7. But no, I don't think there's anything else beyond that. And of course, it was never intended to be meta. It was always
that was going to be my next
one.
question. Yeah. So and it's interesting. I've never really heard that they actually changed that so that they intentionally could be broadcast in any order. So that's probably why. Maybe at one point that was the intention, was for the second episode to be about meta, but then they went straight away from that.
I don't know if there was. I don't think that it was intended to be meta, because if it was, in one of Art Wallace's very first drafts, it would have probably been called meta.
Well, I guess, yeah.
He called it was actually not Terra Nova. It was called Homeland 2, was the name that they gave to this planet. So no, I don't think it was ever intended to be meta. And I think they always intended for the episodes to be screened in any order. I think
it's more of a fan conception, because a lot of fans have asked that question: could that possibly have been meta, or it would have seemed appropriate since it was the second episode that was filmed, but without knowing the backstories, and being privy to all that information as we are now, I think that it kind of alludes to the fact, like you said, that that was not the intent. It would have been interesting if something like that had occurred and they had gone in that direction, but to your point, with syndication or even if it had been on a network, a lot of times episodes are not shown in production order and they go into different directions.
Yeah. Especially back then, because there weren't, almost no series had a continuing storyline.
Yeah. If you had a reference from a previous episode, it was like, wow, they actually referenced something from, that took place. I mean, Star Trek did it in the original series maybe 1 or 2 times, and it was like, oh wow, they actually did a reference. But now you have these constant story arcs, fast forwarding 50 years, or even 40 years ahead from that time, where there's always these little connections and what have you.
That said, sorry, Warren, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but I mean, that's what makes it all that much more fascinating to me, that they were setting that up originally in Breakaway. And I'd be curious at what point that was decided then to go away from that concept of arc storytelling.
I don't think they were setting it up for an arc. They were just setting up the character's backstory.
Just a reference. just a reference to the
Helena had a husband, that he had been lost, presumed dead on the space mission. That was part of her backstory, and I think Art Wallace saw that and ran with it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Matter of Life and Death as well. Being the second episode, it's we're still, although it's able to be screened in any order, it does still feel like the second episode, a very early episode. We're still kind of meeting the characters. We're being introduced to a procedure for the reconnaissance mission to the planet, the assignment from Koenig of who's going to go on the mission, the countdown to the launch, all that kind of stuff has a different feel to it than what they would later do, because they're not going to do that every single time, throughout the series. But it was interesting to see that established.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
In reference to Alan Carter, this is the second time, and I think the last time, that Koenig refers to him as Captain.
Right.
And
Captain Carter. Yeah.
Captain Carter. Yeah.
You can hear a lot of those sorts of changes happening. You can hear the difference, the shift from Koenig and Russell calling each other Commander and Doctor to calling each other John and Helena.
Right.
So those kinds of progressions are happening, and that's I love watching the series in production order, because you can feel and see those things as they change.
Exactly. And then the other piece is the first 4 episodes with the original titles with Barry Morris.
Yeah.
It has the orbiting, it has the moon passing by the, with the Earth and the sun. And after that, we get to see Barry when he's looking at the that scientific globe, so to speak, I think, which was in what was it? It was in Ring Around the Moon. And it just shifted. And I remember when I first found out that Ring Around the Moon was the 4th episode, I was just like, really? Wow. And it all made sense again because of the opening credits. It was, in that.
Yeah, seeing them years later. Hey, Dave, what about over in the UK? Like, did you actually see the series first run? And how far along would you have seen Matter of Life and Death?
Yeah, I saw them in pretty much the first time they were broadcast. The first season was broadcast pretty much around the same time as it was in America, certainly in my area anyway. So I would have saw Matter of Life and Death as the second one. I can remember I only ever missed one first season round, and that was Mission of the Darians. And I only repeated that series once, series 1 once more. Before I finally got the DVDs years later, and I managed to miss it again second time round as well. So I was in my 20s before I saw Mission of Darians. But with Matter of Life and Death, it never stood out to me when I was younger as one of my favorite episodes. But I do remember it, and I did find it mind blowing when the moon blew up. And so that was I thought, how are they going to come back from that? And then it was like it was all in the shower happening moment then, wasn't it? It all came back.
Exactly.
John Koenig showed up, and so I would have seen it when I was about 7 years old. First time round, definitely. I can remember I watched it religiously on a Friday night, except that one episode where I was out for the evening, and I missed it on the rerun too.
Earlier, we were talking, Roy, on our previous show about with Dave about how some of the stations in the U.S. would edit these episodes differently to their liking, and it was very much up to the station. And I remember in particular, and talking about what Bob was just saying about it's clear that this is the second episode because we see that procedural of Koenig selecting the landing party. And in a lot of stations in Canada, that whole scene was cut out because it didn't really impact the story all that much. But it was one of those things where they could gain the extra time and eliminate that scene. And then years later, like in the 80s, I saw it for the first time, and it was like, wow, I couldn't believe it, like finding the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the first time the first episode where we meet David Kano.
Yep, that's right.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It was Uma before in Breakaway, and so we have David Kano now, and he's got.
Watch the Italian version or not, but yeah.
Yeah, Kano has some nice stuff in this episode. I love the ending. The ending scene where he and Koenig are chatting about how many years old they'll be by the time they reach the last of the planets that Kano is predicting are going to be on their trajectory.
The Earth, the planets. Yep.
And it's nice because it's a combination of humor,
Yes.
genuine humor, and then the final shots are Helena looking out at Terra Nova as the planet recedes into the distance, which is really, touching and heartwarming and sad. Melancholy again. And so you've got that combination of humor and touching feelings there as well. They're all kind of wrapped together in that episode closing. So I think it's a beautiful ending for the episode.
That is probably one of my most favorite endings that had been showcased in at least in the first season, if not the second, and I should say really in the series, just because of what you just pointed out as far as that exchange between Kano and Koenig. It's warm-hearted, and you could tell that there's like, a connection and on a certain level. But that sequence where Koenig is going up the steps and the music is playing, in the background, and there's no dialogue, but it's just that it is all conveyed just by them exchanging looks. She's looking out and she's seeing the planet, and she's leaving Lee Russell, behind. I mean, it's really closing that chapter. Yeah. And it was just done so well. And as an actor, I mean, Barbara Bain really sells that moment. And even with Martin Landau too, because you can see that he's concerned about her, and he's just watching, and it just happens. Everything is on key. Everything really just resonates, and each piece of that from an artistic standpoint is complete. And I'm totally with you about that, Bob. It's definitely one of my favorite endings.
Koenig was giving her some space there that she needed, and those silent moments between characters are really, really memorable in year one of Space. And not to go into two other episodes because you're going to get to them in other podcasts. But, another one of my favorites is in Black Sun, between Bergman and Helena. Their goodbye. Yes. There's a single word spoken there, but it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. So, but I'm not going to say Black Sun.
That final scene, it's the music again that also carries that scene.
Absolutely.
And conveys the emotion, right? Yeah. And that's one of Barry's full scores that he did. I think he only did 4 or 5 episodes, but he did that full Matter of Life and Death score, and it's beautiful.
Did I read somewhere? It might have been in one of your books, Bob. Did I read somewhere that they used some Thunderbirds in that Thunderbirds music from Barry Gray as well in that episode?
There's something. I think it's from Thunderbirds Are Go. I think
in medical. I think
Yes, I think it was the first time they'd used stock Barry Gray music, I think, for an episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I also, talking about when they're in medical, there's that fast-paced music when Russell gets away, and it's the opening theme, but it's accelerated. Right. Yeah. And it's a nice touch, and it works very well, and it's appropriate.
Very funky music.
I think that's the only time we actually hear that within an episode, too. If I'm not
mistaken. I think that was Vic Elms, though.
It was Vic that did it. The same fellow that did Ring Around the Moon, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Commissioned to do that one piece. I always liked it because in the second season, and not to get off topic, but I always liked that in Metamorph, there's the variation on the opening theme right after the opening credits, as you see the planet and the volcanoes and things like that. It was sort of the same thing for me, is to hear the theme in that style. Was very unique to that episode.
It's slower paced, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
So Matter of Life and Death also has our first alien planet of the series, Terra Nova. And I mean, I think Keith Wilson went all out to create an incredible planet set. I mean, again, the
first of many.
On that side. The design is so beautiful and so alien, red sky, red water. I mean, Martin Landau talked about that in interviews. He would say, that science fiction often failed in its delivery visually. If you're talking about a planet with red sky and red water, being able to actually create that in a visual way that's convincing for the viewer was really difficult, but they did it. And so I love that planet set. It's fantastic. And then I love how they destroyed it with the big storm.
Yeah.
The storm is awesome.
I wasn't there a big full 2-page spread in Starlog of that set and sort of a behind the scenes shot?
There was, and it was in
Yeah.
one of the earlier Starlog magazines. You're
That
absolutely
always stuck
right.
with me. Yeah. Just such a beautiful layout and just that glimpse of behind the scenes at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah. So there's an interesting thing. Our good friend Kit Bevan has an interesting term that he uses for this episode and maybe a couple of the other early episodes. But he says it's a very pure episode, and I think that's interesting because. And I was listening to what you guys were talking about in the Breakaway podcast as well, and I think David Hirsch was talking about the input that was coming to the production from different people from ITC New York and Abe Mandel and various people. And then, of course, Jerry Anderson's input. Everyone, there was all this input coming in, but it happened more so as the series went on, and it shifted the direction of the storytelling. You can see that again when you look at the early episodes, mid episodes, later episodes, the amount of action, all that kind of thing increases. So when you look at these early episodes, they hadn't had as much push, they hadn't had as much interference, essentially. They were getting it. Of course, they were getting the input, but it hadn't taken them in a different direction yet.
Wow.
So, when Kit says it's a very pure episode, I think what he's saying is that essentially this is kind of the clean, original form of the show.
Untouched as much as possible.
And the honesty of the storytelling is very, very true to what that original concept was when they finally finalized it. So I love that. I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, because it's not, Matter of Life and Death, I think, has received quite a bit of criticism over the years, maybe from fans who criticized the ending, saying it was all a dream, which doesn't bother me. But people have criticized that. People have criticized some of the storytelling in the episode, some of the maybe back and forth, room to room, stuff like that, the progression of the storytelling. But for me, I think the episode is one of the ones that gets better and better with time. The more years go by, the more I love it, and the more I see it differently. I used to see Richard Johnson's performance as Lee Russell as being incredibly stiff. I didn't like his performance. I think even in Destination Moon myself, in my book, I critique his performance. If I was to rewrite that now, I wouldn't, because I see his performance as what he was trying to convey, which was that he was this character who was, he didn't know who he was. He didn't know where he was. What is this place? He didn't know how he got to the planet. He didn't know all these things, and he wasn't fully formed. He became fully formed really only if he was with Helena, but specifically when he was with Helena back on the planet. That's when he became fully formed and able to actually really kind of more smoothly communicate with her. So yeah, it's really an episode, I think, that benefits more and more and more from repeated viewings over the years. People have criticized, Barbara's performance. They've said that she doesn't have emotion. I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of emotion if you look at Helena in the episode. The smiles and cheerfulness on the planet, drinking the water and eating the fruit and looking around. And then there's, the sadness we've already talked about at the end when she's watching the planet recede away and Lee Russell recede away. But then, her state of shock, she's so shocked by everything that's happening. There's a scene in her quarters with Koenig, and he's talking to her, and it's like she's in a fog. She can't even hear him. and she has to pull herself back to be able to focus on that. I think Barbara did all of that beautifully through the
Even
whole.
even
Check
her
about
chorus, she says, "I'm just really numb," right? And that comes. And to your point about Richard Johnson's performance, that towards the end when he suddenly, he's all here, and he's coherent. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I want to interject about your comment about Richard Johnson, because in regards to that, he's almost like a fish out of water because he's out of his environment. He can't function. He was going to tell them, to warn them, but it's almost like what he was, his essence, it could not sustain himself. He could not be sustained in our environment. Just like, I think it's even in the dialogue, he says, I can't survive in your world, just like you can't survive in mine. But still he felt it necessary to do the warning. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to convey it to ward them off because he wasn't able to function at the level that he needed to be. If anything, it was just causing more questions and fewer answers. And then they wind up back on the planet. And then it's almost like everything happens that he was trying to prevent. And unfortunately, it's too late. But at least he's able to, on the level that he is at on the planet and what he is able to turn the situation around. And to your point about with Barbara and Dr. Russell, the way she comes across, if you think about it, all of the emotions that she has to be feeling with everything that is going on, where has not seen her husband in 5 years, and then all of a sudden he's alive. I mean, if you think about it, if you've been, being away from a loved one and somebody that you're in a relationship or what have you, and then suddenly they're back in your life like that, and you're trying to digest all of that, yet handle everything else that you're dealing with as well. Really, she conveys that with her attitude, her performance. It really comes through, because if you think about it, how would one of us act in a situation like that? I mean, she wouldn't be clear, and she wouldn't be, functioning at a level that would be like just normal. She would be confused, yet trying to process it all, especially in her position as a scientist, as a doctor, and everything kind of slipping away, to have all of that loss. And then it's almost like she at the end she snaps. I mean, she's a wreck after it. I mean, how could she not be? Yeah. And there's so many levels, so many layers to everything that are being broken apart, that I really think that even when she even says to him, that he's going to make it better, and then she's just like, how? It's all conveyed. So I think when critics are being critical, it's like, really, you have to look at the whole picture. You have to just find the essence of what the story is about. And I think that folks that are not looking at it that level are really not appreciating the story and the situation. And I think I agree with you that she really did a really wonderful job with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%. Dave, I think you'd mentioned earlier that it wasn't your favorite episode upon first viewing, but you sort of grew into it. So later in life, you're more appreciative.
Yeah, pretty much what's been said. I learned to appreciate it more. When you're 7 or 8 years old, you don't understand how the moon can blow up and they can suddenly reappear again. But as you watch it more, certainly when I got the DVDs when I was in my 20s, then you can watch it and analyze it a bit more and understand it. But I only really saw it twice before I hit my 20s, and I always thought, how did Coney come back to life, and how did and I was probably overthinking it as a kid, and then when you watch it and you appreciate the subtlety of it. There was a lot of subtlety. We talk about Helena's performance right at the end. That was very subtle. Even the subtle humor from Kano, how many thousands of planets are out there and whatever. That was subtle too. So it was I totally agree. The ending was lovely, on many levels, and as I said, very subtle. But yeah, it's definitely one of those episodes you grow into, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. How do you guys feel overall that it holds up 50 years later compared to shows of today?
I think it's amazing. I mean, I think Space 929 is the greatest series ever produced. So that's number one. And then, as I just said, Matter of Life and Death, I think, is an episode that just gets better and better and better over the years and repeated viewings. And I admire it tremendously. I think it's fantastic.
Roy,
Yeah.
what about you?
I think it holds up. I really do. And I think there's defining character moments, and we're really getting into the backstory. I mean, as Bob was saying earlier, this is Helena's story, and we're learning more about her, and also just the dynamics of the relationships that are beginning to form, especially between John Koenig and Dr. Russell. I mean, there's something that's definitely evident. We pick upon it comes out in Breakaway. I mean, when she's really giving him a hard time about when he's in the medical center after his Eagle crash, and essentially just saying about being almost ignorant for going out there. And what does he say right before he leaves the medical center? He goes, "I didn't know you cared," and then it just like stops her in her tracks. And it's like, okay, you know what, there's something going on there. There's definitely that connection that's brewing. So it's a nice progression with this, and it's just giving us that hope for the Alphans. I mean, we're hoping that they're gonna maybe find that place, and I mean, ultimately, we know that this is not going to be it. But still, I just think that we're at what? We're literally at 51 years that this episode was produced. We're coming up on 51 years next year in the early part of January or February of 2025. So it definitely gets 2 thumbs up for me. One thing I do want to interject too is what Dave was saying, and then even with Bob. When we watch these episodes a while ago or when we were younger, a lot of times what happens is we have different feelings about different ones. Some we may like more than we did before, or maybe it goes the other way. And it's a very valid point, because I think you're using your life experiences too on how it really affects you and how you perceive the storytelling.
It changes your perception of
Absolutely.
especially after 50 years.
How about you, Warren? What's your feeling about it?
Well, I mean, number one, it certainly wasn't, and I think Bob, you can probably attest to this. It certainly wasn't the second episode we saw in Canada, so it was jumbled, 3/4 of the way through season one, and it wasn't until years later, and it was only, I think it was only through seeing it and seeing, like you'd mentioned, Roy, the opening credits that sort of gave it away that it was an earlier episode. I didn't even realize that for many years. But I think overall, it's well, the comparisons to Solaris are certainly there, as you mentioned, Bob. But I think it's still able to, like a lot of things Space did very well, stand on its own, even though it was constantly and to this day scrutinized for maybe boring or lifting an idea, from other productions and things like that. But what they did, as an overall, I think during that first 24 episodes was very unique, and that's why I mean, people will remember this show and this series. We talked about how it impacts you a little differently when you see a series from week to week to week over the course of a year or two versus, say, just a 1 2-hour movie, here or there. You don't have the time to grow and develop with the characters and appreciate them and their plight and their story. But I think this was off to a good start, and the seeds were there, with what they carried on with in later episodes. And yeah, no, I think it's a pretty solid episode overall.
Warren, you just mentioned something about Space being criticized for borrowing ideas from other shows. I don't remember hearing that too often. I mean, this is one case of it. I don't think there's too many cases of it, but certainly, Space was borrowed from as well.
Well, of course.
Later shows, I mean, Alien is one.
Yeah.
Star Trek: The Next Generation borrowed
It's
ideas from Space Jam 929.
Star Wars. I mean, you could go on and on and on, right? It's a constant recycling of certain ideas and tropes and down through the years. The famous one is just comparing year one and year two, where year one was maybe took a little more tonally from 2001 versus year two took or lifted more from Star Trek, say, for example. That's all.
Yeah. Well, that was, ITC New York. Yeah. But we're not talking about that right now, are we?
We got lots of time, as we've been saying.
I will say Matter of Life and Death has got one of my favorite bits of kind of philosophy in the whole series, which comes in with the line, Lee Russell's line, where he tells Helena on the planet, "See what you want to see." And I think you can read retrospectively, you can read a lot into that as a pretty good philosophy for life, actually. If you see positivity, if you are positive, you're going to get that back to you in your life.
Glass half full versus glass half empty. Yep.
If you see negativity all the time, if you see hostility, in people, that's what's going to come back to you as well. And so I think "see what you want to see" is a pretty awesome line. I love it very, very much. I have an idea. I probably shouldn't mention it because David Hirsch and I are probably not going to write it, but we had another idea for a book which we wanted to write with Chris Penfold. And with Chris being, gone, I doubt that this book will ever get written. But the title was going to be "See What You Want to See: The Philosophy of Space 1999."
Oh.
And so we were going to go through, all the philosophical points that the series is making through all the different episodes, year one and year two. And that would have been, I think it would have been a wonderful book. But I think without Chris's input, it would be significantly reduced from what it could have been. But that would have been a lovely project to have done.
You reminded me of something, Bob. One of my favorite lines from the series, and it's actually from a year two episode, is at the end of Bringers of Wonder Part 2, when Koenig says, "It's better to live as your own man than as a fool in someone else's dream." It's one of my favorite quotes, and it resonates. But I like what you're saying in regard to that. I mean, it's not just see what you want to see, meaning to make things better, but it's going beyond that. It's like searching deep within yourself to take a moment to really just expand upon everything, and just to be an eye opener and take a moment just to see the world. I mean, it's something that all of us should do at some point. Is just, we're so busy and we're always in motion. And, if you just stop and just look and open your eyes, but really open your eyes in that sense, it's very thought provoking. So that's very.
Do you know what all this is reminding me of? And well said, Roy, is Martin Landau in Ed Wood, where he says to Johnny Depp, "Well, what if my character just took a moment to stop and smell the flowers, right, and appreciate that moment?" Very, very well said, guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good stuff.
One of the things, really quick, is one of the things that Dave and I sort of did throughout the last year was the inspiration for wanting to do this was found on YouTube. Somebody had posted the original opening credits, but it was like 8th generation quality, and it's barely watchable. But one of the things, if you ever do look it up, it's interesting because it has the early ITC logo run at the beginning, and it goes right into that opening credit, and it doesn't sort of have the hook at the beginning. And I was wondering if maybe that wasn't the original concept or idea for them to actually have a different format for the episodes. And I think I talked to Roy about this years after the fact. There was an alternate version of Where No Man Has Gone Before from Star Trek put out, and it sort of changed the format like that as well. And it did the Quinn Martin in 4 different acts and things like that. But we actually did do a version of that. We did sort of Dave and I called it the season 2 version, right, where there's no it's right from the ITC logo into the credits. Just a fun experiment, but it was interesting.
I think I have to double check this to be sure, but I'm pretty sure that Art Wallace's first draft of Siren Planet didn't have a teaser at the end, at the beginning.
Oh.
Really?
It went directly into Act One. And then I think for Art Wallace's second draft, it added a teaser. I think I'm right to say that. Really, I would have to reference my book.
Yes.
My book with David Hirsch.
One more time.
To everything that might have been, because the details are in there. So whether or not my mind is correct or not, the details are actually in that book.
Interesting. And Dave, any thoughts on all that work there with the HD reconstruction?
Oh, I had fun. I have fun tinkering around with the episodes like that, and trying to recreate what was or what might have been. So I had fun doing that, and the most difficult part for me was trying to reconstruct those paintings of Keith Wilson, so I could get new titles over them, which were crisper and cleaner. And it would be interested to know, if those prints still exist somewhere. The pristine, like the one you've got behind you, Bob. Is there more out there somewhere? Are the ones that they used in the end credits for Matter of Life is Death? Because it took me forever with Photoshop to try and recreate those and get out the old titles and put in new crisper titles. So and I'm no professional at this work. I'm just a keen amateur. So it would be nice to know if anyone had those prints of those original paintings out there somewhere.
We could do it up. Yeah. And it's funny, we were talking about different AI technologies a little earlier, and it's maybe within a few years it's going to be really remarkable to see what can be accomplished with things like that and restorations.
Definitely. And the way you enhance the episodes, we're very lucky with Space 1999 because we had the 35mm prints, and Network was still around to upscale them all. I know now that slightly off topic, but Space Precinct is due to come out from Jerry Anderson's store on Blu-ray, and that's been AI'd, so to speak, because I believe that was on 15mm, that wasn't on 35mm. So they've used AI technology to upscale that. So I think we're very lucky that we have the crystal clear Blu-rays we have, because a lot of the ITC shows, things like I'm thinking of The Adventurer, for that Gene Barry classic, all the Protectors from Jerry Anderson.
Oh.
Sorry, Bob?
With Barry Morse and Catherine Schell.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't get that. Sorry.
The Adventurer also starred Barry Morse and Catherine Schell.
Exactly, they're in it, yeah, and that was, and I've revisited that recently, actually, and that that's 15mm. The Protectors, I love the Protectors. Another Jerry Anderson 15mm. So now AI technology is coming out as well, as you said, Warren. You can at least do an upscaling version of 15mm. Filmed programs, but it's still lovely that we had the 35mm. It was filmed on 35mm Space 1999, because it's never going. AI might one day equal what 35mm upscaling can do, but right now it's still falling slightly short. So I think we're very lucky that it was filmed in 35mm.
Yeah, and even we did mention Network earlier. I think Dave brought him up, and the fact that it's really unfortunate that they had to go away, because they commissioned so many of these restorations over the last 15, 20 years of Space and so many other series. And so, yeah, it's not even just to have that quality now, but I mean, yeah, we've been very fortunate all along with all the home video releases of having an upstanding quality presentation, for sure.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to mention, we've been talking about Matter of Life and Death, but we haven't mentioned Antimatter yet.
Yes.
And Antimatter, of course, plays a major part in the episode.
Are we going to talk science, Bob? Are we going to talk science?
Well, I'm not. No. I'm just going to point out that Antimatter, this is the only episode in year 1 to deal with antimatter.
Yes.
And in year 2, there's another episode to deal with antimatter, which is a matter of balance. And
Where'd they get the title from?
Similar titles.
similar titles even. That's right.
Yeah.
Not much similarity between Lee Russell and Vindris, I don't think.
No.
But
They were both in pajamas, sort of.
Sort of. Anyway, that's just I just wanted to point that out. We have 2 antimatter episodes, one in year 1, one in year 2. I'll take them out.
That's an excellent point, though, Bob.
I won't. I'll take a matter of life and death.
Nope.
Okay. Nope. Did I lose you? No, we're still here.
We're here. We're good.
Okay. Sorry, everybody.
Dramatic pause.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. Well, we're coming up on an hour here, guys. Sorry, Bob. Go ahead.
That was the antimatter.
Yeah, it must have been. Absolutely. Yeah, no, well, this has been a fascinating little conversation here. I think we've touched on, like I said at the beginning, some really interesting points about the series, and all the more reason Roy and I had this crazy idea to maybe go through these podcasts and not do production order, but this is all the more reason we should be doing production order, because from episode to episode, all these little changes and developments are going to come into play.
Yeah, I really felt that was a good direction to go with, just because there is such a natural progression with everything, just as the show was beginning to evolve, and Warren and I discussed this back and forth, and I understand the reasons that you gave too, Warren, as far as potentially going out of production order and just kind of making it a little bit more random and fun. Back in the day, Channel 11 WPIX, the first episode that was shown after Breakaway was Dragon's Domain, which makes a lot of sense because it's the flashback story, and it's talking about what had happened in the past. And that's another thing. When I found out, when I actually got, the first technical manual that David Hirsch had produced back in 1977, 78, and to find out that Dragon's Domain was the second to the last episode of the series, I was like blown away. And the only hint I had potentially of that being that way was when Astral Quest came out, because it was one of the last stories that was in the novelization, and I thought, this is odd, but I did not make the connection as an 11-year-old or 12-year-old, because it was shown as the second episode, and it just didn't make sense. But I guess if you're really being detailed, and now looking back in hindsight, there's a couple of things that really could have given a tip off, and you could say whether it be the costumes, the hairstyles, the backlighting of Main Mission. We were talking about that on the
colors, different colors.
The colors, they were different colors. So, and that's something I wanted to bring up. That's a point that I forgot to mention. Talking about the background, wasn't it interesting when they're doing the interrogation of Lee Russell? It's red in the background of.
I loved it.
The lighting was amazing, but I think the only time we would see that is if I think they went to like emergency services or emergency power. But how appropriate. I mean,
and it was very, very, very intimidating as well. I mean, all the security guards standing behind him, Koenig grilling. It was very intense, and intimidating in a way that they never did that again in quite the same way.
Right.
It was unique.
Yeah, but it really added to the moment. So I wanted to bring that up. I forgot about that earlier.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Okay. Well, anything else, fellas?
I was only going to bring up, has anybody ever read the novel novelization of Matter of Life and Death? I've never got around to it.
Well, if we're talking about this one, maybe they're the Lost Stories from Space 959, which David Hirsch and I co-wrote. In here, I novelized the Siren Planet script.
Yeah, I have read that, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah. That was really interesting. I just wondered, the original novel that came out in the 70s, when you had these collection of books.
Yeah, the EC Sub novel or
episodes in there. I can't remember which book it was, but I've got all the collection. I've just not got around to them. And I've just thought, well, I just wondered, whether there was anything in there that was different or, from the script that was different from the actual show. I will have to get around to reading that one, because the Simon Planet was extremely interesting. I enjoyed that, Bob. You know, that was definitely a different take on it. So was there any different, you know, nuances in the novelization of the actual episode? You know, because I believe it was people like E.C. Tubbs, or E.C. Tubb that did the novelization. That was one of the authors, and I know they used the original scripts. And I just wondered if, you know, they taken any artistic license on that particular novelization. I will get around to reading it someday.
Well, I think it's very interesting,
you know.
David. I think the answer is yes, because I know for a fact that we were just talking about Dragon's Domain, and in the novelization for Dragon's Domain, isn't the character called Jim Calder as
It
opposed
is.
to
It was.
Tony
Right.
Cellini?
Yep.
Right,
Yeah,
and that was,
Yeah, they
Yeah.
changed it. Yep.
Yeah.
and there are a couple others. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I think there was. What about the space brain scenes, Roy? We were just talking about those.
Yeah.
Did those make it in the novelization?
In the novelization, I believe they do reference where Carter goes out to when he brings in Kelly, and then what's happening is Kelly is trying to take over the Eagle, and what he's trying to do is he's trying to pilot the Eagle into the space brain, and they get into like a squabble in the module.
Yeah.
But what happens is Carter winds up stunning him, and that's how he's able to regain command of the Eagle and take it back to Alpha. But that whole, a lot of times too, and we'll be talking about this when we discuss Space Brain, but there's been if you had the laser discs also in the novelization that we're talking about, I think that was an Astro Quest, if I'm not mistaken, at least the American version. There are photos that you'll see of those scenes taking place, and yeah, it's a gem. So it'll be fun to talk about. So stay tuned. That'll be, I think, Space Brains episode 20, if I'm not mistaken, in production order, if I'm not mistaken. So 18 weeks from now, we will be discussing Space Brain. So stay tuned on that.
No, awesome. Well, guys, thank you very much again. I think we've had a really, really good talk and broadcast here today. Thanks for being a part of our second episode in this continuing journey. And
Thank you.
Yes, well,
Thank you, Dave.
we've had a lot of fun putting this together and having you guys on and be a part of things. Maybe we'll even have you back we've got lots of episodes to cover. So,
wow.
I'd love to. It'd be fun.
Yeah,
definitely.
No, for sure. Dave, thanks so much again. Really appreciate it. And how was the hockey game, by the way?
Oh, we won 3-1. So it's always good.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a good night out.
Very cool.
Awesome. Okay, Roy.
Yeah. Until tomorrow.
Until tomorrow. Yeah. And I almost did this instinctively, but until tomorrow. Yeah.
Until tomorrow.
That'll be our parting salute. Thanks very much for everything.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, you bet.
Bye.